Grade 5 then in 5 minutes for AQA English Language Paper 2, Question 4. This is the comparison question. If you haven't downloaded the resources yet, make sure you do so. mrcrawfordenglish.com/revision, or you can click the link in the bio. The best way to use the video is to follow the resources, work on them as we go through. The purpose of this then is how to tackle the question and achieve a grade 5 or higher. Question 4 is the comparison question. You'll be asked to compare the perspectives. That means their points of view or their experiences. What do they think about the topic that they're writing about? Your comparison will need to include similarities and or differences. It could be either. You'll need to use evidence from both texts, and you'll need to talk about their use of language or structure as well. Remembering that 3 is the magic number in this question. So we're aiming for 3 paragraphs, 3 really good points of comparison. You may not have time, but that's the goal. You should have had your sneak peek at the start of the exam like we talked about in previous videos, so that you take away the fear and anxiety of this question. When you get to it, there will be no surprises because you've already read the extract and you've already spotted some examples of their perspective. The steps though: number 1, identify the focus of this question so that you can stick to it. Number 2, annotate your words or techniques that help to demonstrate their perspective. And number 3, determine which of those quotations you've identified is the most judicious, which is the best one. See you later, Arch. Which is the best one in helping you to understand their perspective. So what I would do is pause now, have a little look at the extract, source A and source B, and highlight the quotes that you think would be really useful, then determine your most judicious. Assuming we've done that then, I've done the same. The quote that I found from source A that perfectly, I believe, demonstrates the perspective of Whitehead, the writer of that text, is this one. She says, despite record numbers of nurses taking time off because of stress, their public demonstrations have barely made a ripple in the media, but many have been voting with their feet. You can see there that I've identified that her perspective, her view or experience is one of frustration. She's frustrated, that the voice of nurses is not being heard, and you can see there that I've identified 2 metaphors and an adverb as well, which when I get to my write-up, I can squeeze the juice out of the orange, write as much about those 3 different techniques in helping to create a perspective as possible. I've done the same with the second quotation, and you'll remember if you've watched the previous videos for paper 2 that this quote isn't a new quote. This is a quote we used for a previous question. There is nothing wrong with repeating the quotes on different questions. Nightingale says that the first crusade has been fought and won to bring real nursing, trained nursing, to the bedsides of cases wanting real nursing among the London sick and poor. And again, I've identified my perspective down the bottom. This time it's one of pride and a sense of accomplishment rather than frustration. And you can see there that I've picked out 3 different methods that I've spotted. There's some repetition, there's a metaphor again, and some emotive words as well. So what we need to do now is combine what we found, and already you can see hopefully that Whitehead is frustrated that voices aren't heard, whereas Nightingale is really proud that voices have been heard. So we've got a difference there that we can talk about straight away in our comparison. They both also, you have spotted, use metaphors. So that's a nice similarity that we can talk about. However, they do use metaphors in different ways. When we get to it, we can really stress that and explain it. So writing it up, it'll look like this: a what, how, why paragraph followed by a link. The link is where we bring in the second text. So we just write out the first text, then bring the second text in, and then in the second what, how, why, when we're referring to source B, we'll notice from that we're going to compare all the way through. So, as a paragraph then, what might that look like? You'll notice my point, my what, sticks to the focus of the question. Whitehead is clearly frustrated in source A that the voices of nurses are not being heard. I've then followed it up with the quotes that we've already looked at, so I won't insult your intelligence by reading it. The why part is where we get into the language and the effect. So Whitehead merges metaphors and an adverb to express her frustration clearly. Her clever use of metaphor to compare the impact of the protests to a stone hardly making a splash in a pond allows us to see immediately how she feels. We too feel her frustration. There's the effect. Nurses are clearly not being taken seriously and their concerns are not being listened to. She uses further metaphorical language, here's me squeezing some more juice out of the quote, to reinforce the effect that having no voice is having on the nurses. She states that they are voting with their feet, which suggests that instead of fighting, they are giving up and simply leaving the profession out of sheer frustration. And again, I've used frustration to link back to my point at the start. This is my link section there where I bring in the next text. Whilst Whitehead is frustrated that voices of nurses are not being heard, Nightingale's views and experiences are entirely different. Notice how I've now brought my second text in and I've started to compare. And here's that next what, how, why paragraph where hopefully you'll spot that I'm comparing all the way through. Nightingale is a nurse whose voice has been heard, Unlike Whitehead, her experience is one of celebration, and she certainly feels pride in the achievement of nurses. And then I've put the quote in. Similarly to Whitehead, Nightingale also uses metaphor. The difference, however, is that Nightingale's perspective is much more positive. She compares the challenge that nurses have faced to a crusade, which is a vigorous campaign usually associated with the military. She states that in her battle, it's been fought and won. Unlike in source A, the voices of nurses in source B are clearly being listened to, because Nightingale sounds happy about their victory in getting nurses to the sick and poor. So I would pause now, use one of the quotations that you found to structure a what, how, why link, what, how, why paragraph. You can even email me responses, info@mrcrawford.co.uk. It's as simple as that. Give it a go, download all the resources, head to the website. You'll be amazing at it, trust me. Laters.